This is very exciting. Hi, this is Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Just a quick note before I get into this week's interview. One of the things that I'd like to do more on the show is answer your questions. So if you have a question on this episode that we're about to record here and you're about to see, or a previous episode, you can either send those to me at s4@digitalbond.com, or if you want to hear your voice on this show, you can actually record your question. You go to dale-peterson.com, and on the right side, you'll see record your question. It's really quite simple. And I do promise that even if your question doesn't make the show, I will at least get back to you personally via email or whatever means you allow. So send in your questions, comments, recommendations for future guests, anything that you think would help the show or you're curious about. And with that, let's get into the interview for this week. Liz, can you bring up my guest? My guest making a repeat appearance is Edgard Capdevielle. He is the CEO of Nozomi Networks, which he joined in 2016. Welcome to the show again, Edgard.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm joining the repeat guest club. I'm glad to join that club.
And I was shocked. I had to look back, and I actually rewatched it a couple of days ago, but it was August 2021.
That's
right.
So
in some senses, it seems like it's been a long time, and yet, in other ways, I think it was just a blink of the eye.
That's right. I think we recorded in between one of those COVID waves, and of course, the world has kept changing since then, right?
Yeah, and maybe that's a good place to start. And let me start with something, very broad. You can take it where you want. In the last 2 years, what do you think is the biggest or most consequential change to the OT visibility and detection market space? Not just Nozomi, but the market overall.
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit at that time. I think COVID and the maybe permanence of the work from home or remote work has really accelerated digital transformation. So I think, it's becoming a common saying that in the last couple of years, we basically advanced a decade in terms of digital transformation, and a lot of people want to work from home. Plants and facilities need to be accessed remotely. That opens up a set of permission processes, technologies that would have taken a decade to get implemented, and of course, the cybersecurity implications, and it all has happened much faster. So I would say acceleration of digital transformation has been a key theme through this last couple of years. I think this last couple of years have also been very turbulent. Ukraine, following waves of COVID, the challenging geopolitical economic environment that we just had, the banking scare with Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse and others. So turbulence is becoming a common constant in our space. And while it may not have direct implications with OT cybersecurity, it does create it does affect consumption, buying behavior, and adoption of new technologies. So I would say those two would be top of my mind.
Well, let's dig in a little bit more. When I talked to you in August 2021, Nozomi had Nozomi Networks. I'm going to just use the shorthand Nozomi. Sorry about that, but it's just from covering it for so long, I always think of you as just Nozomi. Nozomi had 200 employees about. How much growth have you had? What's your employee number now?
We've had quite a bit of growth. We're approaching 300. Our growth from 20 to 21 was about 134%. Our growth from 21 to 22 was close to 80%, I think 77%. So as the company gets bigger, obviously the growth rates become more normal, but still very high double digits. We're very, very pleased with our growth. We continue to expand globally. We continue to expand, not just addressing the U.S. government and related consumers, but also international governments as well. We've expanded into verticals beyond what you would consider typical OT, more IoT related, like building automation, hospitals, healthcare, transportation. And of course, the big topic that we were addressing about a year and a half ago was cloud and cloud adoption. And of course, Vantage, our SaaS based monitoring application has taken a leading position when it comes to deployment of our products. So we've been very, very pleased with our growth and expansion.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the cloud aspect and your Vantage. And just sticking on the growth, it's really hard to get numbers in this industry. But you did happen to get on a Deloitte top 500 fastest growing technology company list a couple of years. So according to Deloitte's reckoning, and I don't know where they get their numbers, but Nozomi had 2,185% revenue growth in 2021 and 420% revenue growth in their 2022 numbers. And it was also interesting. I watched an interview. You don't do a lot of interviews, so I appreciate you coming on the show, but I saw an interview on ISMG. And when you were talking about the 2022 numbers, you were happy with them, but you said they weren't tracking to the expectations at the start of the year, that it was a good year, it was a growth year, but actually you were expecting more. I don't expect to get the hard numbers from you on Nozomi, but to put it in the form of the question, do you think those percentages are in line with the market itself? Is that somewhat similar to the market growth rate, or do you see you're just taking a larger portion of the market share?
Yeah, let me start from the beginning. So I think you mentioned Deloitte. I also don't know whether they get their numbers. They like using revenue numbers. We did win that fastest growing company 2 years in a row, consecutive years in a row. So we're pretty happy with that. The growth numbers that I used were ARR numbers, which is I'm talking a lot with the public markets and investors, so they like to hear ARR numbers. And of course, as a private company, we won't share our hard numbers. But I do think they're in line with the market and industry. I don't think Nozomi, I think, is taking a little bit of share because, of course, as we talked a year and a half ago, we've seen a significant amount of consolidation in the market. We don't have 10, 12 players anymore. We have the top three. So we see our share growing, but I wouldn't call it disproportionate. I would see the market growing. I think the comment around 2022 would be a comment that my colleagues in the space would share. The turbulence around 2022 meant that we grew, and we grew in an important way, but not probably as we planned in November 2021 when everything was rosy, right?
It's funny. Let me ask you this as a question, then I'll give you my point of view. Do you think the economy, the fears of the recession or the actuality of the recession, probably depending what industry you're in, do you think that is affecting security budgets?
So I think they do affect. This is very interesting question. So I'm gonna turn back the clock to the beginning of COVID. Every company under the sun, when COVID became a reality, let's call it, between February and April of 2020, had the duty to evaluate what's going on and what are you going to do about it.
Right.
Every company that you would know had a significant reduction in expenses. Hunker down was the mode, the preferred mode of everybody. What we did, we wanted to be a little bit more thoughtful. We went and did a mini research study with help of a few service providers, and we tracked IT spending across all this, a very significant amount of time, starting with the dot-com era and the dot-com bust and the credit crisis and 9/11 and all this time. And we noticed that, yes, IT spending was significantly affected by those periods. But then we took another look, maybe a more detailed look at cybersecurity spending. We found a couple of interesting points. Cybersecurity spending on average for the average cohorts and above was never negative. So the growth was never negative. So you spend either the same or more than the prior year. That was actually really, really interesting. So that shows that cybersecurity is a very resilient category. And based on that, we were able to make the corresponding decisions, for COVID, and of course through the different waves of COVID, and as the inflation or recession, whatever people want to call it,
Right.
evolve from there. So I think we live in a very nice neighborhood when it comes to cybersecurity. But yes, spending is affected by the macro environment, with the caveat that you need to adjust and modulate for our space in cybersecurity.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned, I commented on it in my quarter in review podcast. My fail was some people bemoaning the fact that security people were losing their jobs due to the recession. And there's this feeling that security is immune. Security is so important that it is immune to budgetary pressures. And nothing is immune to budgetary pressures. And a lot of things are really important. Sometimes I think the security community overemphasizes its criticality. I mean, there are many, many things that are critical to a business, and security is just one of them. But I want to talk a little bit, because in a Tech Target interview recently, you used two terms that I thought was interesting. You said that there was a lack of budget muscle, and then you said when a new category like OT security, you don't have budget momentum. So can you talk a little bit about how maybe what budget muscle and what budget momentum mean when you talk about them, and how that is affecting the growth of OT security?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good concept that we use at Nozomi. I used both of those interchangeably: budget muscle, budget momentum, also budget inertia. So I'll use an analogy. I think you like my analogy, so I'll use one. If you and I, Dale, got together and form a brand new company, we're gonna be in the category of next generation firewalls. So
Okay.
we obviously compete with next generation firewalls, and there is a budget for next generation firewalls. Last year, company X had a budget that they spent for next generation firewalls, and the year before they also had that budget. And budgets grow and shrink according to how the company and the economy, are going. And if you and I want to win, the only thing that we need to do is beat, whoever the main contender is on the next generation firewall is. Let's assume for this example that it's Palo Alto Networks in this particular customer. So if we beat Palo Alto Networks, we earn their budget. We earn 100% of their budget, or a significant portion of the budget. We don't need to do anything else, and we're good. Why are we good? Because for next generation firewalls, or the next generation firewalls, there is budget from the last year, and there was budget the prior year. So for OT security, most of the time, still a greenfield market. We're entering a situation where there is either no budget because nobody was doing anything in industrial cybersecurity, or very limited. They were doing POCs. They had vendor A on plan A, vendor B on plan B if the customer is bigger, but there was no significant investment. So what the CISOs are experiencing in the last few years, so some of them started experiencing in 2019, very few, extremely few. Most of them in the last couple of years, and the big majority in the years going forward, is they have, and I'm going to use a different analogy, they have children, right? So they have, let's call it 4 children. They have to feed and care. One is called endpoint security. The other one's called network security. The other one's called network security operations and SIMs, and whatever number of categories that you have. And you have momentum and inertia investing in those categories from one year to the next. And all of a sudden, especially if you're an industrial plant, the world changed. We live in this post-colonial pipelines world, and you have to secure all your plants, all of them, or the board is asking the questions, right? So that's the equivalent of getting a completely brand new child into your family. So you had 4 kids, now you have 5 kids. You did not get extra 20% budget. Your budget remained the same. And this particular kid is different, right? Because it's OT. So I'm not 100% in control of it. I don't understand the language, the experience, and the technologies, and the everything about it is slightly different. And so you have as a CISO a lot of challenges. One of them being budget inertia. I didn't get 20% extra budget, but now I have quote unquote a new child that I need to take care of, and I'm not used to dealing with this child. This child, uptime is more important than security. I'd never heard of that, right? So I think CISOs are experiencing a lot of challenges, which I think was the topic of my tech interview, and specifically budget and lack of budget inertia, lack of budget momentum, or lack of budget muscle was one of the topics.
So you're seeing in most, and I'm sure it varies by company, there's probably all different sorts that companies are doing. You're seeing it more as an issue, more like your child analogy, where my salary hasn't gone up because I have another child beyond what it would normally go up, as opposed to saying there's this new job I have called OT security that is paying me a wage. So you're not seeing it so much that OT security starting small, needing to grow on its own, but having the additional challenge of starting small and needing to grow in a constrained circle or
Correct.
a constrained budget. Interesting.
Correct.
Which is really difficult because it is hard to take budget away from other things.
Correct.
Right?
So
Everything wants to grow.
Going back to the analogy that you and I have a company of next generation firewalls. If you and I had a company, or in your case, in our case, Nozomi, we don't have a lot of budget from prior years. So when we win and we say, okay, we have shown to this customer that we're better than our the top 3 other players, then the question of budget comes in. So where is the budget going to come from? Because last year I only spent a couple of peanuts. So now we have to say, okay, what else are you going to not do in order to make progress around implementing industrial cybersecurity solutions across the board?
I wonder if this is maybe an original sin that we have in this industry, that we approach this as these are a set of security controls that are required. It's a cybersecurity problem as opposed to a risk problem. Because you could make the case, if you were going to a board, that dealing with risk in our factories is different than dealing with risk in our enterprise network. The factories are their own elements. They have their own budgets, right? They have their own capital equipment budgets. They have all that. But we've been if we're lumped into this same cybersecurity budget that can only grow at a certain rate, we are fighting for dollars amongst other programs, which have been very good at getting those dollars and increasing those dollars over the years. So we have to, if your analogy is right with the child, if you had, let's say, 3 children and they were all taking horse lessons, you can't just have a 4th child take a horse lesson. Someone else has to drop something out. Maybe they don't get to go to ballet or something like that. Something has to be lost.
I actually really liked your discussion with, I think it was your prior podcast or maybe 2 podcasts ago with Marty Edwards. I think you guys talked about funding for these type of initiatives and water utilities, some specifically folks that were rate based, and Marty had a very smart comment around what about the for-profit world, and I'm going to tie your conversation with Marty with the conversation you and I had also a year and a half ago. We were talking, I think I was trying to make a different analogy. I was trying to make an analogy around evolutionary biology or something like that. And I think the point is IT security spending and the need for IT security have evolved together over time. So it's been baked into the business model. Industrial cybersecurity, the rapid convergence, the fact that we had the pre-colonial pipelines world and the post-colonial pipeline world has created and then COVID has created an acceleration that doesn't let OT security spending with the need for OT security to evolve together over time. And it creates a gap where one evolves faster than the other. And it requires maybe an unnatural or inorganic, closing of the gap, if you will, which is the same budgetary problem that we keep talking about that you and Marty were talking about a few weeks ago.
Okay. So I'm talking with Edgard Capdevielle. He is the CEO of Nozomi Networks. And I want to hit a few other things. This next one is probably my last callback to our last interview. And you don't have to give a long answer if your opinion is the same as it was then. But back then you said that you didn't think companies that said we do X, Y, and Z and OT security. You said they don't really do OT security, and you didn't really view them as serious competitors. The ones that are doing IT security, and by the way, we have these OT arms. I'll mention some companies you don't have to, but this could be like a Tenable or a Cisco or, you know, or a Forescout or something like that, that has taken in what would have been one of your competitors back in the 2017 to 2020 timeframe. And at the point 2 years ago, or in August 2021, you didn't really think those were OT security companies if they were doing all those other things. Do you still feel the same?
So I'll try to I'm not going to correct the record, but I'm going to adjust the record a little bit. But because if I think if you go back to that interview, what I was trying to say is, if unless you do an acquisition, and that's the difference between maybe some of the examples you have, unless you do an acquisition, it's very hard to extend tools that were designed for IT to work in OT. And there's tons of companies, and I won't mention it. You know, some of them were born in the NDR space. Some of them were born in the IoT security space. And when those companies say, "Oh, I can extend my platform to also cover OT," I think that's a hard claim, and I would be very skeptical of that claim. So if you have a vulnerability company that was very successful in IT and all of a sudden wants to cover OT, I wouldn't buy that unless they made an investment acquiring a company that did build a product from scratch to work in OT. So I don't think I think my statement remains the same. I just want to adjust it to fit the two examples that I think you mentioned.
But I think at the time you said you weren't seeing those companies much out there anymore. You weren't bumping into your Forescouts, your Tenables, and others
I think
in
that's
the
correct.
competition.
I think so. Again, you keep bringing my friends at Tenable. Tenable is probably one good exception of a company. I think we were talking also about, hey, do you buy companies as a technology or you buy companies as a business? If you buy companies as a business, you tend to be successful. If you buy companies as a technology, and you don't do the VC-like investments that those companies require, you're going to be in trouble.
Okay.
I would say that that's largely the case. We haven't seen a lot of our great contenders of 5 years ago. With the problem, you know, I think the folks at Tenable, our friends at Tenable, have been really good about investing in their Indigi assets. Those are the two names. I won't mention any more names today.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, let's switch now to the cloud. You mentioned the name of the Nozomi cloud offering is Vantage,
That's right.
which came out a little bit before our last interview. And I asked you at the time for some percentages, but let me ask you a little bit on the cloud side. So first of all, I think you always bring this up. We're not talking about the sensors in the cloud. You need to gather the data where the ICS is, and most of the ICS today and for the next couple of years are going to be on-prem. So there's always going to be an on-prem component. So when I'm talking cloud, I'm talking about the more management, collection, analysis side of the situation, what would typically be done in Guardian in the Nozomi case. But now you can do this in the cloud, so all your users can access the data, do their analysis, get their information from Vantage in the cloud. When people are buying Vantage, are you seeing them buy it more as their initial entree into it? Or are you seeing more people say, no, I don't want to do the cloud, and they start with Guardian, and then once they feel more comfortable, they move to the cloud?
Yeah, so just one very quick clarification. Guardian for us is our sensor appliances. So Guardian are our sensors. I agree 100% with what you said. The sensors need to live where the ICS network is. For the foreseeable future, the ICS network is going to be on-prem. Eventually, you know, we see the cloud extending to on-prem with the term, you know, edge computing platforms. I think the big three clouds already have, quote unquote, edge computing platform extensions, which basically means, you know, kind of virtualized environments that are on-prem, but part of the cloud. I think if you have the word millisecond as part of the conversation, you know, you need some on-prem or edge computing cloud, edge computing platform portion enable into your infrastructure. But regardless, it was still.
So what you're calling, I got my terminology wrong. Is that your CMMC, or what?
Correct.
What is the? So it's the CMMC that is the computer-based device that is getting all the data from the sensors from your guardians, and that's what is also available as Vantage in the cloud.
Correct. We call it the Central Management Console, the CMC. The CMC is designed to manage hundreds of guardians that are connected to it. The CMC is for customers that are not yet ready to adopt a cloud-based solution. And then Vantage extends the capability of the CMC to leverage all the cloud benefits. Yeah. So Vantage is our SaaS-based solution for managing hundreds or thousands of guardians. And now we have another kind of sensor, the endpoint sensor called ARC. So ARC sensors and Guardian sensors can connect to Vantage to provide a single pane of glass across all your infrastructure.
So going back to the question then, are you seeing especially the larger, I'm not thinking so much of the small to medium, but the larger customers, are they sticking with CMC? Are they moving from CMC to Vantage? Are they starting with Vantage? What's the trend line you're seeing?
We're seeing a very significant adoption of Vantage. We track Vantage adoption. So for example, at the end of 2022, over 1/3 of our bookings and over 1/3 of our active POCs were Vantage first. So Vantage originated, the conversation started with Vantage. On top of that, we're seeing a lot of going back to our install base and upgrading them to Vantage. And that's on top of that. So for a product that is fairly new, still, less than 2 full years in production, we think this is pretty amazing, pretty high adoption for a cloud-based product in OT. As you know, OT has been quite reluctant to entertain the cloud offering. And so we're pretty pleased with those ratios.
What about the edge? You mentioned the edge before. When I look at offerings from yourselves and some of the other competitors out there, I don't really see what I would call an edge component to the offering. Am I missing something? Do you feel like you have an edge component now? And if not, I guess why not? Because I always think it's kind of an immature cloud offering if you don't have an edge component.
What do you mean when you say edge?
Well, I would expect something that would sit at the edge of my factories. Let's say if I had multiple factories, I would have one edge device that then would be getting all the data from the guardians and sensors, doing some level of analysis there, and then offloading what made sense to the cloud. But I don't, when I look at your network diagrams, and also performing the security function of restricting what comes in and out of that edge device. Yeah. Something like whether it be deployed on something like AWS Greengrass or your own platform or something like that. I keep waiting for that device, and I don't see that.
So as you probably know or remember, our Guardian sensors, if you have a very, very small deployment, a Guardian sensor, just one sensor, is a full solution. So you don't need anything else if you have a very, very small deployment. The issue has when you have a larger site or multiple sites that have more than one Guardian. As soon as you have more than one Guardian, then of course you do need a management framework on top of it. The on-prem is the CMC. CMC can monitor multiple Guardians on-prem at the edge, if you will, and you can have a full solution with multiple Guardians and a CMC or multiple CMCs. The CMC is a multi-hierarchical and geo-distributed framework. So you can have, let's assume one of our largest customers has hydro generation facilities all over the world. Imagine you have 9 hydro generations facilities in Brazil. Each one of them has Guardians, and you probably have in-country and probably in-factory management requirements. So you probably have a virtual CMC in each one of the sites, and then one probably for regional coverage in Brazil. And then you probably have some like South America covering Chile and Peru as well. And then you probably have your security SOC in Europe, which is where your headquarters are and where your cybersecurity professionals are. So the CMC completely on-prem and at the edge, but also hierarchically reporting up can support that type of framework. Or much simpler and faster is to deploy the cloud, right? The cloud would show with role-based access control and complete multi-tenancy the right information to the right user at the right time. Does that make sense?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I don't know if it makes sense, but the market will tell us. I still haven't seen any vendor go to where I think the market's going to end up, but we'll have to see where that is. Let's see. How about the MSSPs? Are you getting traction with them? Do you have an example of like an MSSP that's doing it well?
Oh yeah, I think our MSS program is going really, really well. I'll highlight 2 or maybe 3. I'm sure if I highlight any one of our partners, I'm gonna get a ton of emails from the other partners that I should have highlighted. Our friends at Accenture and IBM are doing really, really well with their MSSP offerings powered by Nozomi Networks. Our friends are Honeywell are making really good progress. This MSPs program is working fantastically. It's early, so it's not a huge number, but it's progressing well. I think it addresses the need of we can't really hire the number of cybersecurity professionals to cover all the OT infrastructure today. Mm-hmm. So we need the experts to kind of spread that from a centralized way, and that's why the MSSP format or business model makes a ton of sense. It's early, and we're trying to close a big gap. So we think it's a very good area for us to invest.
Okay. I want to hit 2 other things quickly before our time runs out here. One is we've seen just a deluge of U.S. government activity in this space, in OT cybersecurity. Guidelines, goals, regulations, programs, suggested legislation, and such. And one of the areas that they've taken a real interest in is having detection solutions out there in industry and then sharing that information with government. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, in some of the programs, actually being involved in the provisioning of such things, like saying you get this thing from the government or through this government program and send the data to us and we share it. How is the government affecting the OT visibility and detection market? Are they in any way a competitor? Are they growing the market? What are you seeing?
I think the stance of the government had a very significant and important change and positive change with the formation of CISA, and specifically under the leadership of Jen Easterly. It's been a fantastic change. I think pre-CISA, it was a little bit, every vertical and every group, ISAC or whatever, are kind of doing their own thing. Some of them, we believe, were headed in the wrong direction with closed proprietary solutions. And I think CISA has changed that, specifically under the leadership of Jen Easterly. The approach has been very open towards industry. So when we didn't know where things were going to go, we got together with some of our peers, something that doesn't happen very commonly in any industry. So we got together with some of our direct competitors, and we formed the OT Coalition, which again is not common. It's very rare. The government saw the OT Coalition, which had the primary goal to, hey, here's our industry, not vendor specific or vendor bias, but industry opinion on what are the guidelines should be, what kind of recommendations should come from the government. And B, if we're going to start sharing information, we should probably agree on what standards are so that it's open. Open means secure, closed means not going to be productive, and it's probably going to have to be replaced. So we needed something that was open. The CISA, and again, under Jen Easterly's leadership, welcomed the effort. In fact, she made all the OT Coalition members founding members of the JCDC, which has been a fantastic initiative and effort. And soon to come, I don't think I'm the right person to announce anything on this front, but soon to come, we're going to have an announcement from both CISA and industry around establishing a set of standards for sharing threat intelligence between all of us. And that is a very unique and interesting development that I have not seen in any other cybersecurity setting. So I'm extremely proud of the work that Nozomi and our competitors, along with CISA, have accomplished here. Like I said, I think this is going to be announced very soon. I think you'll want to have a closed eye on it.
Okay, we'll look for that. Just one other quick question on that. So today, for example, I think it's the CRISP program, but there's a number of programs where they've said, for example, the 100 largest electric utilities are sending detection data to the U.S. government for analysis and then further sharing amongst those 100 and others. Does Nozomi Networks solution feed any of that today?
So we have been exchanging information, threat intelligence information with CISA for quite a while.
Okay.
What we want to make sure is that anybody can do that. As you know, critical infrastructure does not depend only on the 10 largest of anything in any one vertical.
Mm-hmm.
Our different supply chains, from electrical to gas to water, are all, I would say, what's the right word? I don't want to use the word fragile, but we are highly dependent. We're all real time. We can't really, we're not as resilient as we need to be. So it can not just affect the top 10. It has to affect everybody who's in the chain. So we need to create a system, just like the English language, where if I say something, everybody can understand me, right?
Okay. Well, I saved what is probably my favorite question, and it's a tough one, for last here. We talked about budget. And one of the things that I'm running into is this lack of ability to tell whether any of this stuff is making a difference. So what sort of metrics should be applied for the community and for an individual company to say, I deployed this solution from Nozomi or one of your competitors? What metrics should I be looking at to say that was a valuable decision on my part? I am getting the risk reduction that is appropriate for that level of resources, both initial expenditure and ongoing support. Because if you do your solutions right, if you're really looking at the detection side, it's analysts, it's an ongoing effort. It's not a small expenditure to do this detection and visibility thing right. What should they be looking at to see if they're getting a good ROI on that?
Yeah. I'll use one analogy that is not applicable, and then I'll try to come back and answer your question, right? So I think what you're looking for, and I'll make the analogy of seat belts in cars, right? So if we're going to be driving cars, we should be wearing seat belts. The government has determined that. Car manufacturers have to build seat belts into your cars. Otherwise, they cannot ship the car. That's illegal. And the industry has evolved so that the cost of the seat belt is part of the car. Mm-hmm. It's not an option at all. So the safety board has, continuously publishes, the metrics that you're looking for. Hey, we believe that when people have an accident, if they're wearing the seatbelt, this is the outcome, versus when they're not wearing the seatbelt. So I understand what you're looking for, and I think that in the seatbelt analogy, an answer would make sense. I think in the world of cybersecurity, and I'm going to remove the world of OT security, if we were talking about generic security, you don't see those metrics being published in the network security space or endpoint security space, for example, because you have active malicious folks and folks that are trying to defend themselves and making a claim that, hey, or even, as you know, it's very difficult in our space to name customers. Just knowing what kind of technologies you have, it may help the attacker, or may give the attacker some advantage, or even ideas of how to change their tactics. So those metrics. So I guess I'm not answering your question. Those metrics.
It's a hard question, but
yeah,
I think it's an important one.
Not answered in the broader cybersecurity category. So I'm a little bit of a pragmatic when it comes to that. If it's not, if say Palo Alto Networks or Cisco or one of the other companies in different categories don't have to answer that question for other industries, for other sectors of cybersecurity, then why create a problem for OT? Now, what I would say though is a practice that cybersecurity folks have from in other categories, is you do have to have a cybersecurity value proposition. And unfortunately, it's usually seen as, hey, fear mongering. It is a best practice in other cybersecurity sectors to combine your cybersecurity value proposition and potential need to discuss, the bad outcomes with some sort of hard ROI. And that's one of the huge benefits that we have when it comes to industrial cybersecurity. People are still having to address, vulnerabilities when it comes to all and inventory. And so if you have a hard ROI value proposition with your solutions, which, just like Nozomi does, we dramatically accelerate the time it takes to do asset inventory and vulnerability management when it comes to OT. Then you can combine both value propositions. One, cybersecurity, which may not have a hard metric, as per your question, with what we call operational visibility value propositions, which is the automation and the reduction in cost associated with creating inventories or managing vulnerabilities.
I think it's still an outgoing or ongoing question as to this, because we could be deploying, it seems like, for example, if you look at the US government, they've had Einstein, they've had all these systems where they're doing more and more detection. And whenever anything slips through, they say we need more detection. So it's one of these things where I don't know. I believe it's the right thing to do, but it would be really nice to be able to show some level of, let's say, detected attacks that were prevented, that reduced impact. And I guess the flip side of that is Nozomi and most of your competitors put out annual reports that show the statistics getting worse and worse and worse. And yet the expenditures are going up and up and up. So those trend lines they should be mirroring each other, right? As the expenditures go up and up and up, we should be getting better and the impact should be going down.
I don't agree with you. I think we're at the beginning of a wave where we're trying to close a very large gap. If you think about it, like I said, look at the gap that we're trying to close. Industrial devices have existed for a very long time. Usually you have, let's go back to outside of OT. You have network equipment being shipped and, networks are being adopted. So this is decades ago, right? So as networks being adopted, you have then network security challenges, and then you have network security as a category. So, if you're selling 10 in network equipment, 0.1 is network security, and they have evolved together over time. And that's the benefit of, evolutionary biology, evolving together with your environment. That has not happened in OT. We have grown our automation and an industrial footprint globally. We depend on it, and it's gigantic. The number of OT networks is unthinkable. And we're just getting to start to close the gap with industrial cybersecurity. So, of course, because we're just starting to close the gap, you see the expenditure go up. And because we're in the post-colonial pipeline world, which folks realize, oh my God, I can convert your uptime into my profit, the number of attacks is increased. So it is at the very beginning of an accelerated convergence that you see both going up.
Okay, well, that might be a to be continued, because I'm not sure, especially if you get down to the asset owner side. If I'm on the board and I spend all this money, I want to see some result from that money. I don't just want to hear that we did the right thing and it's a really big problem. I want to say, what are you telling me? What we have spent all this money, what have we accomplished by spending all that money? And so far, I didn't get an answer that I felt was solid from you, but no one else has. So you're no worse off than anyone else that I've talked to. But I really think, especially on this detection space, we're spending so much money and there's so much mind share. The mind share is almost more important than the money, because the mind share is really dominating. So we need to be getting some ROI on all this effort we're putting into it.
I think you start being effective once you cover all your bases, right? You can't protect what you can't see. So you have to get some visibility. You probably don't have the right segmentation, or you thought you had the right segmentation, but you don't know. So let's get that segmentation established and monitored. You probably want to have, close a huge gap when it comes to vulnerability. Some things have never been patched ever. You want to close gaps when it comes to passwords that have never been changed. rights and attributions that have never been reviewed, remote access that has never been checked. So, like I said, there's so many gaps to close that you need to start covering the bases. And yes, it's appropriate to have a level of dissatisfaction when, hey, I'm just starting to close the basics, and that costs me money, and I'm still not seeing results. I can understand the frustration, but it's required.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Edgard, if someone wants to reach out to you, where do you hang out these days? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter, completely offline? Where do you interact with people?
I'm online and available. LinkedIn and Twitter are two great places. It's always a pleasure to come talk to you, Dale. I hope it's not another year and a half, and I hope to make the 3 appearance club very soon.
And will Nozomi be at RSA?
Absolutely. We have a lot of teammates at RSA. A lot of our partners, a lot of our customers are going to be around. So please come visit.